So hello everyone, I'm here with Derek Oliver, who is Managing Director of Caledonia Social Care, and we're here to discuss the theme of what happens when in an employee-owned business, when essential and difficult decisions have to be made affecting employees' pays and conditions, what happens and how can employee ownership actually help that decision move forward? So I heard Derek share his story at Caledonia Social Care on a webinar with the Employee Ownership Association. So Derek, can you explain what the situation was when you took over the role of Managing Director at Caledonia Social Care?
Yeah, I can, Val, and thank you for having me along to your session today. Not long after I took over as Managing Director of the organisation back in late 2018, we had a real challenge in the business whereby, as a social care organisation, we were committed to paying all colleagues in the organisation the living wage. However, the staff who paid into our business back when we launched in 2017 were on what we called, enhanced terms and conditions. They equated to 41 days annual leave every year, up to 6 months full sick pay, as well as 6 months half sick pay every year. So those terms and conditions were very difficult for us as an organisation to sustain, whilst also having that commitment to pay at the living wage. So essentially, we felt something had to budge. We were in some ways limited with the options in front of us because it's actually a contractual requirement with local authorities that we engage with that we pay the living wage. So it's not a case of you can ignore that request. Around about at the time, 80% of our business, of our referrals, of our income came from local authorities. So it's really important that we continue to honour that commitment to pay the living wage. So clearly, we had to look at that. We looked at that as a board and a senior management team. Essentially, we only really saw one viable way forward, and that was obviously to review terms and conditions in the organisation to ensure we had that sustainable commitment to paying the living wage, which would obviously satisfy our commissioners. However, for me, the real beauty and benefit of working in an employee-owned organisation is transparency when it comes to the information that is available to you at any particular time when making a decision. The participation opportunities that should exist when difficult or challenging decisions need to be made. That kind of accountability and responsibility that all colleagues should have in order to make the right decision when a decision has to be made. So we reminded ourselves of all those factors, and that was the real instigator for us to go out to colleagues and present them with the situation we found ourselves in. The first step in that process, Val, was going out to our company employee forum, which is made up of a representative of each colleague, of a colleague rather, from each area within the organisation. So we have frontline social care workers as part of that forum. We presented to them the challenges that we had. They were very obviously understanding of that. They were really good actually in being able to highlight and predict some of the barriers we would have to finding a solution to this, or some of the anxieties that would exist amongst our colleagues and amongst our staff teams. But as part of that kind of session initially with that group, we were able to identify a number of options that were available to us as an organisation. So rather than going out to individual staff teams and saying, this is what we have to do, we presented the options that are available in front of us, which essentially were, just to sum them up now. Option one was like, we do absolutely nothing here. We struggle to pay the living wage, but we keep terms and conditions, which clearly would have been risky because that would have put the contracts that we had at that time, in serious doubt. Second option available to us, well, okay, we pay the living wage, but we honour the terms and conditions that everyone has. But clearly that would have placed a real threat of the long-term sustainability of our business. If memory serves me correctly, I think the annual cost to doing that was around £30,000 per year. And based on the cash flow available to us at the time, that meant that really Caledonia Social Care would have operated for another 18 months, 2 years maximum, before we would have been in a position where we're just simply unsustainable. Or the third option was to look at, how do we review our terms and conditions in a way that are, still attractive to people working in the organisation. There's no denying or getting away from it. It constitutes less than the terms and conditions I've just outlined at the start of the call. But how do we make parts of that attractive? And actually, the solution we came up with, we were actually able to go above the living wage slightly. So it meant that all colleagues involved in that sort of consultation received a salary increase, which was obviously part of the benefit to that process. So that's the approach we took when we went out to the wider groups of colleagues in the organisation. It related to around 65 people at the time. So we didn't go in and say, this is what we're doing. We very much highlighted the challenge we're having. We've done our utmost to bring colleagues along with us on that journey of finding a solution, presented the three options that we could see in front of us, and encourage colleagues to either, vote for one of them as not as a member of staff in any way or as a colleague, but as a company owner. Vote for, almost the most sustainable and viable option as an owner of the business. And also, just as crucially, highlight if anyone felt that there was an alternative option that either I or our management team or our board had failed to consider. So we felt that was a really kind of, powerful way to manage that situation, that consultative approach. Very much felt, the feedback we received at the time was colleagues very much felt that they're involved in the decision-making process. Was the news well received? No, of course it wasn't. I mean,
so what was it like?
Yeah.
What was it? So we're at the moment. You've consulted the representative body.
Yeah.
How many people were in that group?
There's about 6 or 7 on that group, and from that group, two are elected to Caledonia Social Care's board of directors, and 2 are elected trustees. But yeah, there's around 6 or 7 on that group.
So how did they react? Those 6? How did they react to these options that you presented? Very
honest in telling us this is the impact, the potential rather to seriously impact on morale in the organisation. So they were very quick to point that out. What I found quite reassuring and positive out of it, though, is that all grasped and understood the business logic for having this discussion. They all agreed that the only viable option here, in order to keep all the work that we currently had at that time and be sustainable, was the option to review terms and conditions. But crucially, what they were able to do was predict and highlight to us some of the objections that might exist when we take this out to the wider team, some of the barriers to people getting on board with this. And that was really helpful in enabling us as a management team to almost tailor and pitch our presentation accordingly. But despite that, and I think that certainly helped the process to go a lot smoother. You're asking what was the response? There was a degree of upset, and I think that is perfectly understandable. If you're sitting in a room, as part of a consultation process with 41 days annual leave, and you're looking at revised terms and conditions that significantly reduce that, then you aren't going to be happy, and you are going to be upset, and it's not something you're going to embrace straight away. And that's why we felt it was really important. I mean, in any walk of life, in any business file, if there's a review of someone's terms and conditions, you have to consult. That's not unique to an employee-owned business. But we really did go above and beyond there as to how we consulted, how long we consulted for, and how hard we worked with colleagues to, enable them to select the option that they felt worked best for the business, or identify an option that we hadn't considered. And I think when you make that effort and you give people that time to go away and reflect on, the situation we found ourselves in, and you really encourage people to help find a solution. People might not be happy with the route you're going down, but at the very least, what I feel we do is to understand them. And I think we've got the evidence there in terms of the outcome from that exercise, Val. So I think I told you around 65 people were involved in that process. The vast majority signed up with those new terms and conditions. Some actually signed up immediately because it equated to a pay rise, which is a really positive thing. It's not to suggest anyone in our organisation is financially motivated. I think you work in social care because you do that job because you love it, but it's nice to be able to pass on a benefit of a pay rise that actually exceeds the living wage, where you're able to do that. And that was obviously well appreciated by colleagues in the organisation. So yeah, the vast majority signed up. I think off the top of my head, 3 people opted to leave the organisation as a result of that. I think one was going to happen naturally, just due to that person's age or in considering retirement, and a couple left because they probably didn't agree with the direction the organisation was going in. But you mentioned around essential and difficult decisions to make, and it was a really crucial decision for us to make at that time. You obviously attended the webinar I spoke at last month, and highlighted at that particular point in our journey, sustainability was a huge challenge for us. That's not to say we weren't performing in that regard. Actually, our financial performance has improved since we launched in April of 2017, and it certainly had come a long way, but it had a long way to go in order for our organisation to be sustainable. And that exercise we went through was crucial because it allowed us to keep the work that we had. It allowed us to grow our services in the areas where we worked because we were on framework, which was crucial. But also the terms and conditions that everyone was then on in the organisation were sustainable to Caledonia Social Care. So we noticed some really immediate improvements in our financial position. Our first full financial year post these changes, Val, we were able to practically break even, which was a huge result for us given where we'd been previously in previous financial years. And this financial year, which is the financial year that's followed that, we're in a position where we feel we'll make a modest surplus. So I think the fact that many of the 65 or 62 who signed up for this exercise are still with us. They might not have been delighted about this at the time, and it was a very difficult exercise to go through. But as I highlighted at our AGM last week, it's as a consequence and as a result of taking these really difficult decisions together, collectively. That's one of the real beauties for me in employee ownership, when tough decisions have to be made, or when you're in a tough time as a business, is resilience that really comes to the fore in employee-owned organisations. So by doing that collectively, we've been able to, really drive Caledonia Social Care forward into the more sustainable and healthier position it finds itself in.
So what changes as you as a board of directors or leadership team? Were there any modifications you made to what you thought was the best option that you made after consultation? You mentioned that the representative body helped you to predict some of the pushback that you would get, but did anything change from what you thought was right for the business compared to what actually happened in the end?
Yeah, to be honest with you, no. We were quite honest and transparent when we consulted with colleagues initially around, here are the options available to us. This is the option that we feel is the most viable, sustainable, sensible option for us as a business. You'd have thought possibly there might be modifications if suggestions were coming back our way around possibly other options. There weren't any suggestions around you've missed something. But you're right, was there maybe a hybrid approach of taking benefits from each option and including that in what we went for? There wasn't, and I guess the reason for that, Val, is we are a social care organisation. Anyone who knows anything about social work or social care services will know that they aren't particularly profitable. They aren't awash with money, and year on year our finances and our budget and our financial planning is very, very tight, so that there's little or no wiggle room. And we're very honest with colleagues when we explained that back in the time. That's not to say though, if our financial position continues to improve or we continue to do well as a business, that we can't revisit terms and conditions in the organisation if improvements can be made, because we're always really open to doing that, and we've all encouraged colleagues in the organisation to flag where they feel improvements to those terms and conditions can be made.
So you came from being a charity, and so people were they in that mindset of still being a charity? I'm interested to just ask you that question. So you talk about surplus, not profit. How does that change, do you think, compared to an EO business that is purely coming out from the commercial world?
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing process. I think naively back in 2017, it's something we thought possibly we might have been able to solve within, I don't know, the first year, 18 months. That's certainly not been the case. That's been my learning. And to give a bit of background there for anyone listening, so yeah, Caledonia Social Care was set up back in 2017 to take over the running of Alzheimer's Scotland, who are a national dementia specialist organisation, to take over the running of their care at home services. The reason for that, there was, key changes happening in Scotland around the kind of commission and climate. Commissioners were looking for organisations to be able to deliver services more generically. And obviously, constitutionally, Alzheimer's Scotland wouldn't be able to do that because they focus on one client group, that being people with dementia. So that process involved taking over the running of Alzheimer's care at home services. It involved around about 140 people transitioning into Caledonia Social Care in April of 2017. And yeah, the majority of those colleagues, myself included actually, I previously worked for Alzheimer's Scotland, who are a great organisation, a great charity. A number of colleagues though had a real long length of service working in that organisation. In some cases, that was up to 15 years. I think the average length of service was around 7 years. So people had built up a real bond and connection, obviously, with that organisation. And we had to work really hard, certainly during the first year, to obviously instill the same commitment, pride and enthusiasm people had in Alzheimer's Scotland into Caledonia Social Care. For some people, they embraced that and they really got on board from day one. Others, it's something we had to work on over time. Now, how did we do that? Round about the transition time, we facilitated employee ownership workshops, which were really crucial in educating, informing people around their rights and responsibilities as company owners, the benefits that exist in an employee-owned organisation. Do you know Jackie Martin? She actually
yes.
Jackie from
so she helped.
She facilitated those workshops. We set up an employee implementation group prior to Caledonia Social Care launching, which ensured all colleagues were informed of the transition process. They had an opportunity to contribute their comments, thoughts, any anxieties they had. Our organisation's logo actually was developed at one of those workshops Jackie facilitated. So from day one, we tried to ensure everyone had the opportunity to participate and help to shape their organisation. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy. I mean, my learning of that process is, not a lot of people knew anything about employee ownership. A lot to educate people around the benefits of the model. I mean, I remember being asked at one workshop actually, because everyone would essentially be company owners, and we were asked, okay, so if the business begins to fail, would that financially be out of pocket as a result of that? And I think that, to me, highlights perfectly the lack of, and that this isn't a criticism, but the lack of understanding that exists around employee ownership, and the importance, if there is anyone on this call listening to the call thinking about transitioning, the importance of educating people as soon as you possibly can, but obviously at a pace that suits them as well, so it isn't a frightening process in any way, shape or form. So that was crucial, I think, in getting people on board. But as I said to you, I think maybe naively, we thought back in 2017, this is something we can achieve within, the first year, and the reality was it's not. I mean, if someone's worked for charity for so many years, you're looking at a real culture change there in your organisation, and that does take a lot of time. It's something we're still working on at the moment, but I think it's something we've made enormous progress with. So we have a standard now. We do employee ownership workshops throughout the year. We invite colleagues to shape the agenda for those. What are their areas of learning? What would be the benefits to the workshops? What would they like us to cover? We're also now, as an organisation, I feel much better at sharing information. We do monthly podcasts from me, a member of our management team, or a member of our board, which highlights how the business is doing, where have we performed well, where do we need to improve. And I think that, sharing of information and that encouraging people to participate in the business has gone a long way to enthusing and motivating colleagues who work for Caledonia Social Care.
Yes, so that sounds like, sorry, my volume seems to be a bit odd, but yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I can hear you
Good.
perfectly well. Yeah.
It sounds like you've gone from an organisation that was making a deficit with terms and conditions that were not sustainable to an organisation that's now making a surplus and that has much more engaged employees.
Yeah.
So it's a brilliant case study, and thank you so much, Derek, for sharing that with us. And thanks very much again.
You're most welcome, and thank you so much for having me, Val, and listening to me over the last 10-15 minutes. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Derek.